The courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter as Officer Jake Simmons leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, smirking. A filthy, wild-eyed homeless man was dragged in, shoeless, mumbling to himself, the stench of old garbage trailing behind him like smoke. Jake let out a mocking laugh that cut through the silence. "Look who rolled out of the dumpster," he said loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. "Hope he is not here to represent himself." But then, something shifted. The judge stepped in mid-sentence and stopped cold at the sight of the man. His eyes went wide. The room held its breath. The bailiff's voice cracked as he said, "All rise for Chief Justice Malcolm Rowe. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below." Officer Jake Simmons had worn the badge for over 12 years. With his crisp uniform, neatly trimmed beard, and swagger that filled every room, he was the kind of cop who walked like the law bent to him. His record was clean, his arrests high, and his confidence untouchable. Everyone at the precinct knew him as Ironback Jake, because nothing ever seemed to rattle him. He worked the downtown beat, where concrete was cracked, sirens were lullabies, and the homeless clustered in alleyways like forgotten ghosts. Jake did not see them as people anymore. To him, they were hazards, clutter, obstacles in the machine of law and order. It was not always like that. Jake's own childhood had been stitched together with food stamps and evictions. His mother worked 2 jobs and still came home exhausted and smiling. Jake remembered cold winters without heat and sandwiches made of mustard on bread. But they survived. She made sure of that. So when he joined the force, Jake carried that chip on his shoulder like armor. He had escaped the cycle. He had pulled himself out. So why had these people given up? Why had they chosen sidewalks over shelter, addiction over effort? They all got excuses, he would say, spitting on the pavement. I had him too. I just did not take him. That morning, Jake arrived in court to testify in a routine shoplifting case. He wore his uniform like a second skin, nodded at the judge, leaned into his usual bench seat near the front. Court days were easy. No running, no screaming, just statements, paperwork, and his favorite part, watching the guilty squirm. Then came him. The courtroom doors creaked open, and 2 bailiffs shuffled in a man who looked like he had been sleeping in sewage, hair wild and matted, skin darkened with grime. His tattered coat hung off his frame like dead weight. One of his shoes was a plastic bag. He mumbled something incoherent, and the gallery chuckled nervously. Jake leaned over to the officer next to him. "This one's ripe," he said, waving his hand. "Better check for lice after this." The man swayed a little, eyes distant and unfocused. Jake tilted his head and laughed again. "Dumpster Jesus," he whispered, "here to cleanse us of our sins." A few others laughed. Most just looked away. The man stumbled as he tried to sit, and a bailiff steadied him. Jake rolled his eyes. Why even bother bringing him in? Should have just hosed him down and let him wander. It was not cruelty, Jake thought. It was clarity, honesty. He said what everyone else was thinking. That was what made him good at this job. He saw people for what they were. He did not sugarcoat. But then Judge Michael Harrell walked in, glanced at the man, and stopped. Everything changed. The judge's face lost all expression. He stared at the homeless man as if he had seen a ghost. A ripple of confusion spread across the room. Jake sat up straighter, his smile fading. The bailiff swallowed hard. His voice shook. "Everyone rise for Chief Justice Malcolm Rowe." Jake froze. No one moved. For a split second, the courtroom was a vacuum, soundless, breathless. Then the sound of shuffling chairs and confused whispers filled the air as people scrambled to stand. Jake remained seated. His limbs felt frozen. His ears rang. Did he say, "Chief Justice"? Jake whispered. The homeless man, no, Chief Justice Malcolm Rowe, stood tall now. His voice had not yet returned, but his eyes were suddenly alert, deep, watching everything, and they landed right on Jake. Silence weighed down the room like a closing tomb. Jake stood late, his body moving before his mind caught up. He stared at the man in front of him, the one he had just mocked without mercy. But now, Chief Justice Malcolm Rowe stood taller. He still wore the same rags, the same stench clinging to him like old grief, but something had changed. The judge on the bench, Judge Harrow, nearly tripped over his own words. "Sir, is it really you?" Malcolm nodded. His voice came out rough, cracked from days of disuse. "Yes, Michael, it is me." Murmurs broke out across the gallery. Officers, clerks, attorneys. They looked from one another, unsure if this was a prank or a breakdown in reality. Jake felt cold, his face flushed with a slow burn of shame rising through his neck. "Escort the courtroom," the bailiff called out. "Clear the gallery." Immediately, within minutes, the courtroom emptied. Only a few essential personnel remained. Jake stood stiff as Malcolm pointed to him directly. "You, Officer Simmons, come with me." Jake blinked. "Sir," Malcolm's voice steadied. "You laugh the loudest. Let us talk." Judge Harrow nodded grimly. "Do as he says, officer." Jake followed Malcolm down a narrow hallway to the private chambers behind the courtroom. The echo of their steps bounced off the marble walls. The Chief Justice, still in disguise, walked slowly, but with the quiet authority of a man used to being obeyed. The door clicked shut behind them. No audience, no badge to hide behind, just a man Jake had ridiculed, and the mirror he was now forced to look into. Malcolm sat. He did not clean up. He did not change. He simply looked at Jake. "Why did you laugh?" he asked, voice soft. Jake hesitated. "I thought you were just some guy. You looked homeless." Malcolm interrupted. "Filthy? Disposable." Jake shifted his weight. "It was not personal, sir. I have just seen a lot out there. Most of them do not want help. They curse at us. They push us away. I have learned not to take it seriously." "And so you mock?" Malcolm said. "So you humiliate?" Jake opened his mouth, then shut it. Malcolm leaned forward, eyes sharp. "I have been living on the streets for 13 days. No phone, no ID, just a coat and cold concrete." Jake said nothing. "I was shoved into an alley by an officer on my second night," Malcolm continued. "Told to move or die there. I was spat on outside a diner. One officer offered me food, then threw it on the ground and laughed while I picked it up." His voice trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from fury he had not yet shown. "I slept next to a woman who cried herself to sleep because her son would not let her in the house. I listened to a teenager explain how he sells his body just to afford socks. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible, Officer Simmons?" Jake swallowed hard. His chest tightened. Malcolm looked straight through him. "And then today, in front of a courtroom full of people who trust you, you laughed." Jake felt like he was shrinking, like the badge on his chest weighed more than his spine could carry. "I did not know it was you," he said quietly. "That is the point," Malcolm replied. "You never know who someone truly is when they are at their lowest." Jake dropped his eyes to the floor. "I am sorry, sir." But the apology felt hollow in his throat. He knew it was too late for words. Malcolm leaned back in his chair. His tone softened, but his disappointment remained thick in the air. "Justice is not just punishment, officer. It is dignity. It is compassion. You were supposed to protect me, and instead, you made a joke out of my suffering." The room went quiet again. No gavel, no sentence, just the ache of realization. Jake did not know it yet, but this moment would mark the end of who he had been, and the first flicker of who he might still become. Jake sat alone in the precinct's break room the next morning, staring at the floor tiles like they might offer answers. The news had already spread. Whispers followed him everywhere. Co-workers avoided his gaze, conversations ending when he walked past. He had been placed on temporary leave pending a formal inquiry. No gun, no badge, no uniform. But just when he thought the damage was done, a letter arrived at his apartment. It was handwritten, sealed, signed by Malcolm Rowe. Inside, a single line: "Walk in the shoes you mocked. 1 week. No shield. Then we will talk." There was a meeting scheduled at City Hall. Malcolm was waiting. Jake arrived in civilian clothes. Worn jeans, a hoodie, no watch, no wallet. He felt exposed before he even stepped inside. In a small, Private chamber, Malcolm laid out the terms. You will live on the streets for 7 days. No identification. No contact with your precinct. You will be observed from afar for safety, but no one will interfere. Jake blinked. You want me to pretend to be homeless? Malcolm shook his head. No, I want you to experience it. You may not know what that means yet, but you will. Jake wanted to argue, to defend himself, but something in Malcolm's eyes told him the time for words was over. So he nodded, and the next day, he stepped into a world he had spent years trying to ignore. Day 1, confusion. Jake wandered downtown, already feeling people stare slide past him like he was made of glass. He carried nothing but a blanket and a sandwich in a paper bag. His first night was under a freeway bridge, the roar of engines above and the chill of concrete below. Day 2, hunger. The sandwich was gone. His stomach groaned like an empty cave. He asked a vendor for food, only to be told to get lost. His pride stopped him from digging through trash, but desperation clawed at his throat. Day 3, pain. He was shoved by a man twice his size for sitting on the wrong park bench. Later, a group of teens threw a soda can at him, laughing as it exploded on his chest. That night, 2 strangers stole his blanket. He screamed for help. No one came, not even the cops who drove by without stopping. Day 4, surrender. Jake stopped trying to look clean. His eyes sank. His back ached. His voice got quieter. He sat against a brick wall for hours, invisible among the others, men and women like shadows. That was when she sat beside him, a woman in her 50s, with weather-worn skin and sad, intelligent eyes. "You're new," she said softly. "First week." Jake nodded. He did not have the energy to lie. "My name's Clara. You don't look like you belong out here." "Maybe I do," he said. Clara chuckled. "We all say that at first. Then we get used to being forgotten." She offered him half a muffin. It was stale, but it tasted like gold. That night, as they sat in silence, Clara shared her story. She had lost her home after a battle with cancer drained her savings. Her daughter could not afford to help. The shelter was full. She had not spoken to anyone from her old life in 2 years. "No one asks how I am anymore," she said. "They just look through me, like I'm some invisible disease." Jake listened, really listened, not as a cop, not as a man looking for weakness, but as someone who finally realized what he had never understood, how easy it was to fall, how hard it was to get back up. "That night," he cried, not loudly, not for show, just silent tears that dried on his cheeks in the cold. He was changing, not because someone told him to, but because, for the first time, he felt what it meant to be unseen. On the morning of day 5, Jake woke up to find Clara gone. Her spot beside him was empty, her blanket still warm. A man sitting nearby shrugged. "Cops clear that block. Some of us got pushed east. Some got pushed nowhere." Jake stood up slowly. His legs ached from days of sleeping on stone. His breath came out in a fog. He was colder than he had ever been, but that was not what chilled him. It was the thought of Clara, swept away like trash, disappeared. He searched for her all day, asked around, got nothing. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the skyline, a city worker tossed a garbage bag into a truck and told Jake, "You might find who you're looking for at the shelter line on 14th. If she made it." Jake walked the 12 blocks in silence. When he arrived, Clara was there, sitting near the back of a line that stretched around the building. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "You came looking?" she said. Jake nodded, thought, maybe the world swallowed you whole. Clara smiled. "Not today." The next morning, something changed. A city car pulled up beside Jake as he sat outside a diner. A woman in a gray coat stepped out. She handed him a small envelope and whispered, "He says it is time." Inside was a return address. Malcolm Rowe's chambers. Jake arrived at City Hall again, this time in the same clothes he had worn on the streets. No shower, no shave, no mask to hide behind. Malcolm stood waiting near the grand stone staircase, this time in a sharp suit, but he bowed his head slightly when he saw Jake. "Walk with me," Malcolm said. They walked in silence to a private conference room. Inside were 4 other justices and Judge Harrow. Everyone sat. Jake remained standing, unsure what came next. "Your 7 days are over," Malcolm said. "Tell us what you learned." Jake hesitated. He cleared his throat, then began. "At first, I thought I was pretending," he said. "But by day 2, I was starving. By day 3, I was afraid. And by day 4, I stopped thinking like a cop and started thinking like a ghost." He looked around the room. "I used to say these people chose this life, that they were lazy or high, or just broken. But the truth is, I never asked. I never listened. I just assumed." Malcolm folded his hands. "And what now?" Jake took a breath. "Now I see them. As people. As survivors. Some of them are sick. Some are scared. But every one of them is human. And I treated them like trash." His voice broke on the last word. He looked down, shame heavy in his throat. Malcolm leaned forward. "Would you go back to your job the same way you left it?" "No," Jake said. "If I ever wear the badge again, I want to do it differently. I want to protect people like Clara, not push them aside. I want to be the kind of cop who asks instead of assumes." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Judge Harrow cleared his throat. "This inquiry was never about punishment, Officer Simmons. It was about transformation." Malcolm rose to his feet. He stepped closer to Jake. "You were cruel," he said. "But cruelty can be unlearned. Compassion is what comes after shame. If you let it." Jake nodded slowly. "I want to let it." Malcolm handed him a manila folder. Inside were forms, recommendations for reinstatement under new terms, community outreach, shelter partnerships, monthly evaluations. Jake took the folder in his hands like it was made of glass. As he turned to leave, Malcolm stopped him with one last question. "Tell me one thing," he said. "When you laughed at me in court, who were you trying to impress?" Jake paused. His voice was low. "Everyone," he said, "except the man I should have been." The courtroom looked different this time. Not because anything had changed physically, but because Jake Simmons was not the same man walking into it. He wore a suit, clean, simple, nothing flashy. His beard had grown in a bit. The badge was gone from his chest, replaced by something heavier, a quiet honesty in his posture, a visible ache in his eyes. The gallery was packed. Word had spread about the officer who mocked a homeless man, only to discover he had laughed in the face of the Chief Justice of the state. Now, after completing an unprecedented 7-day street immersion, Jake was scheduled to give a formal statement on record. He stepped to the center of the room, a single microphone placed on a podium before him. He looked out at the crowd, attorneys, officers, reporters, some of the very same people who had laughed along with him weeks ago. Malcolm Rowe sat in the judge's chair, not presiding, just observing. He wore his robes again now, the weight of power draped over his shoulders, but his eyes remained steady, watching, waiting. Jake's throat tightened, but he spoke. "My name is Jake Simmons. I was an officer in this precinct for over 12 years, and I thought I understood justice." He paused. "I thought I understood what it meant to protect and serve. I thought some people deserved my help, and some people deserved to be forgotten. I thought cruelty was strength. I thought silence was just another way of moving forward." He looked down at his hands. "But then I became the very thing I used to ignore. And no one saw me. No one cared. No one asked if I was okay." Jake scanned the room. He found familiar faces. Officers who had once laughed beside him, now struggling to meet his eyes. "There's a woman named Clara out there," he said. "She lost everything to cancer bills. She sleeps near 14th Street. Every night, she hopes it does not rain. Every morning, she counts how many muffins she has left. And every time she looks at uniform, she braces to be moved or silenced." He swallowed hard. "I used to think people like Clara were broken, but now I know it was me. I was the one who broke. I broke the moment I stopped seeing people. I broke the moment I laughed." A hush fell across the room. No one shuffled. No one coughed. Jake's voice grew stronger. "I want to apologize. Not just to Chief Justice Rowe. Not just to the court. But to every person I passed by with my eyes full of judgment. To every human being I reduced to a stereotype. To every soul I failed to protect. He looked at Malcolm then. Their eyes met. You trusted me with a badge. And I failed you. But worse, I failed them. Malcolm did not nod. He did not speak. But the lines around his eyes softened. And that was enough. Jake took one final breath. If this is the last day I ever stand in this room, let it be the first day I finally stood for something. He stepped back. The room remained silent. Then slowly, one by one, people stood. No applause, just quiet acknowledgement. The kind that comes when someone lays down their armor and tells the truth. Jake turned to leave. The doors creaked open. The world waited on the other side. He did not know what it held. But for the first time in his career, he walked out not as an officer, but as a man who had learned what it meant to serve. Spring crept into the city slowly that year, melting the grime of winter one puddle at a time. On the corner of 14th and Delaney, Officer Jake Simmons stood, not in full uniform, but in a windbreaker-marked community liaison. The badge was back, but he wore it differently now, not like armor, more like a reminder. He no longer patrolled with hands near his belt. He walked with them open, nodding to the faces he used to ignore. He had requested the downtown district, specifically the areas he once dreaded, the shelters, the soup lines, the people beneath the bridges, because now he wanted to do more than see them. He wanted to know them. It started with names. He greeted Clarence outside the mission each morning, helped carry bins of donated clothes with Maribel, brought coffee to Joel, a former addict who now ran a peer counseling group. Slowly, faces turned from suspicious to curious. Then, over weeks, from curious to grateful. And Clara, she smiled every time he stopped by, always seated on the same crate beside the old flower shop. You do not look so invincible anymore, she teased one morning. Jake smiled back. That is kind of the point. They shared a quiet moment, sipping lukewarm coffee. She talked about trying to reach her daughter again. He offered to help track her down. Every day, Jake carried a notebook, not for violations, for stories. He wrote down what people needed: bus fare, clean socks, medication, just someone to talk to. He passed the notes to a small team of volunteers, and social workers now partnered with the precinct. It was not perfect. Some days were hard. Some people still spat or swore at him. But Jake no longer responded with anger. He understood now. Pain does not always have polite manners. 3 months into his new role, Malcolm Rowe visited the precinct. He came alone, quiet, no cameras, just curiosity. Jake was at the bulletin board, pinning up a flyer for a free clinic, when he heard Malcolm's voice behind him, Officer Simmons. He turned, startled, but smiled. Chief Justice, Jake said. You do not have to call me that anymore, Malcolm replied. They walked together through the community wing. Jake showed him the resource room they had built, the bins of coats, the board of missing family members, the map of warming shelters, pinned with little flags. Malcolm said little, but before he left, he turned to Jake and offered his hand. I do not forgive easily, he said, but redemption is not for me to grant. You earned something better than my approval. You earned your reflection back. Jake shook his hand firmly, not with pride, but with peace. As Malcolm stepped outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, lighting the street like something sacred. Jake looked down at his notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote one word at the top, Clara's daughter. Then he closed it and stepped back into the city. He was finally learning how to serve, with his eyes open and his heart wide. People say justice wears a blindfold, but Jake Simmons learned the hard way that sometimes the blindfold is not on the system. It is on the people who enforce it. People like him. People who forget that behind every shaking hand or tired face is a story they never bothered to hear. He used to laugh at those stories. He used to walk past pain like it was a pothole on the road. But not anymore. Now, every morning Jake ties his boots and remembers a time when his name meant fear. Now, it means something else, something quieter, something harder to measure. Trust. He does not save people. That is not what this is about. He sees them. And that seeing, that witnessing, has become his most powerful act of service. Because there was once a man who came into court, smelling like garbage, mumbling nonsense, dressed in filth, and Jake laughed at him. But that man turned out to be the most powerful judge in the state, a man who could have ruined him, but instead chose to teach him, a man who gave him the gift of humility in the most brutal, unforgettable way. And Jake let that pain do what punishment never could, change him. He no longer measures justice by arrests or paperwork. He measures it by the sound of a woman's laugh on a cold morning, by the warmth of a hand reaching out not to take, but to offer, by the names he remembers, by the stories he carries. He still keeps that little notebook, not to record the worst in people, but to never forget the best he almost missed. And now, if you ask him what justice really is, he will not mention laws or titles. He will tell you it is this: to stand beside the lowest and still look them in the eye